The blade was already drawn when Queen Seraphine threw herself between her daughter and the altar. "Strike me instead," she said, and her voice did not shake, though everything inside her was breaking apart at the seams. 20 years of composure. 20 years of choosing the crown over every softer thing she had ever been. Cracking open all at once in the flickering torchlight of a temple that smelled of stone and old blood, and something she could not name that felt terribly like inevitability. Behind her, Amara knelt on cold stone, wrists bound in silver thread that burned against elven skin. A burning the old texts called ceremonial, but which looked to Seraphine like torture dressed in tradition. Her daughter's eyes were wide with a terror no 18-year-old should ever have to carry in her face. They found Seraphine's across the altar, and in them was something that broke the queen more completely than any blade could have. Not fear alone, but something beneath the fear, something that looked almost like surprise, like a girl who had spent years wondering if her mother truly loved her, and had not fully believed the answer until this exact moment. When the answer arrived, holding nothing but itself, no crown, no strategy, no political calculation, only a body step between a daughter and a knife. The priests of the hollow vow stood in a circle around them both, torches throwing long shadows across the face carved into the altar 1,000 years ago. A face that looked cruelly, almost exactly like Amara's. As if the old pact had known this moment was coming long before either of them was born. As if it had been waiting. "The prophecy does not ask for your blood, your majesty," the high vow keeper said softly, his voice carrying the particular gentleness of a man delivering a verdict he has rehearsed so many times it no longer disturbs him. "It asks for hers." Somewhere beyond the temple walls, an army that did not belong to her kingdom was waiting for an answer, an army that had made camp in the valley below the northern pass 3 days ago, its fires visible from the palace towers at night, its silence in the daylight hours somehow louder than any war drum. And Seraphine, who had ruled for 20 years without flinching, who had buried a husband and silenced a rebellion and sat across treaty tables from men who wanted her throne, and never once let the crown see the slightest tremor in her hands. Seraphine had no answer left, except the truth she had spent her entire reign refusing to look at directly. She was not a queen first. She was a mother, and mothers do not hand their children to the knife. Not for a kingdom, not for a prophecy, not for anything at all, not even for the promise of 400 more years of peace. What happened next would decide whether either of them lived to see morning, and it had started as all the things that matter most seem to start, not with armies or prophecies or ancient debts, but with a woman sitting alone in a room long after the candles had burned to stubs, tracing borders that had not moved in a generation, wondering when she had stopped knowing how to reach through a closed door and simply knock. 3 weeks earlier, Queen Seraphine of Veralis sat alone in the map room, long after the council had dispersed and the corridors had emptied of petitioners and advisors, and the particular kind of silence that follows a full day of being needed by everyone except the one person whose needs she had trained herself not to notice. The candles had burned to stubs. She had not replaced them. She sat in the dimming light, with one hand flat against a map she was not truly reading, tracing borders that had not moved in a generation, telling herself she was working. She did this every night, not because the maps ever changed, they never changed, but because the silence of that room was the only place in all of Veralis where she was allowed to remember that she had once been someone other than a crown. 20 years ago, Seraphine had been a different woman entirely, warmer, softer, the kind of elf who laughed without first checking who was listening, who touched her husband's hand in public without thinking twice about what the court would make of it, who had walked into her daughter's nursery at midnight simply because she missed the smell of her. She had been the sort of person who believed, with the uncomplicated conviction of the very young, that love and strength were not enemies, that a queen could be tender and still be feared, that a mother could weep at her child's bedside and still hold a council meeting the next morning without anyone using that weeping against her. Then Aldrich died. He had been defending a border skirmish that should never have reached him. A minor incursion, the kind of thing that should have been resolved by a captain and a handful of soldiers, not a king on a horse in the freezing dark of a mountain pass. He had gone anyway, because Aldrich had never learned to send someone else into danger he could face himself. She had loved him for it once. She had hated him for it. After, in the way only people who love someone completely can hate them for being gone. The girl who had laughed easily became, that winter, a queen who trusted almost no one, least of all herself. She had a daughter to raise alone in a court built entirely of knives disguised as smiles, and she did the only thing she knew how to do. She built walls, not around Veralis, she had always been good at those, but around her own heart. The inner walls, the ones no army could ever breach because she had built them herself, from the inside. She told herself it was strength. She told the court it was wisdom. She told her daughter on the rare nights she tucked her in herself, instead of leaving it to the nursemaids, that a queen could not afford to be soft. That softness was how kingdoms were lost. That love was a luxury reserved for people who did not carry crowns into every room they entered. Amara had believed her. For years, Amara had believed her so completely that she stopped reaching for her mother's hand at council meetings, stopped asking to sit beside her at feasts, stopped expecting Seraphine to come to her chambers when the nightmares woke her screaming. The ones Seraphine could sometimes hear, faintly from the corridor outside, and about which she did nothing because doing something would have meant admitting that she heard them in the first place, and admitting that would have meant admitting everything else. What Seraphine feared most, more than rebellion, more than war, more than her own death, which she had long since made a kind of peace with, was that she had built her daughter into a girl who no longer believed she was loved. And she feared, too, in the deepest unlit corner of herself, the thing she had never spoken aloud to a single living soul, that something would come for Amara one day, the way something had come for Aldrich, sudden, early, before she had managed to say even a fraction of what she had always meant to say, but kept deferring until the right moment arrived. And the right moment never arrived, because she kept waiting for the walls to feel safe enough to come down first. She did not know yet how close that day already was. She only knew that lately when she looked at her daughter across the long dining hall, the one that fit 40 people and felt like a cathedral when only 2 of them were seated at opposite ends of it. Amara looked back at her with the careful, neutral expression of a girl who had long ago decided that hoping for more was more painful than asking for less. And some nights, in the silence of the map room, Seraphine wondered if she had spent 20 years protecting a kingdom while losing the only person in it who had ever truly been hers to protect. There was a particular ritual to her loneliness, one she had never named even to herself. Every evening, after the council dispersed and the corridors emptied, she would walk past Amara's chambers on her way to her own, never quite taking the direct route, never quite admitting that the long way was not actually shorter, only richer, not to enter, never to enter without invitation, only to pause outside the door and listen for some sign of her daughter's presence on the other side. A laugh shared with a handmaiden, the soft scratch of a quill against parchment, the particular creak of the chair near the window that Amara always sat in when she was reading. Anything that told her Amara was simply, ordinarily alive, untouched by the weight Seraphine carried for both of them. She rarely knocked. 20 years of practiced distance had convinced her that knocking would only confirm what she feared most, that her daughter no longer wanted to be found. Or, worse, that she did, and Seraphine would not know what to do with the wanting. So she listened from the hallway instead. Like a thief stealing small proof of a life, she had built walls to avoid fully entering. What she did not know, what she could not have known from outside that door, was that Amara did the same thing in reverse. Some nights, the princess sat awake long past the hour she should have slept, listening for her mother's footsteps in the corridor, counting the heartbeats between the sound of the steps approaching and the sound of them continuing past. waiting for the pause that never quite became a knock, wondering if the woman on the other side of the door loved her too much to enter, or simply did not love her enough to try. Two women, a few inches of old oak between them, each one certain that the silence meant the other one did not care, each one quietly drowning in care the other could not see. That was the wound beneath the wound, not merely a queen who feared losing her daughter to prophecy or violence or time, but a mother and child who had spent years grieving a love. They were both, separately and silently, still entirely living inside. The vow keepers arrived at dawn, unannounced, their gray robes soaked through from a hard ride in the night rain, their horses lathered and trembling at the palace gates. Seraphine knew before a single word was spoken that something ancient had woken up, not because she had any particular gift for premonition, but because she had ruled long enough to understand that visitors who ride through the night and arrive at dawn do not bring ordinary news. Ordinary news can wait until morning. Whatever the vow keepers were carrying had not been able to wait. She received them in the throne room, not the map room, because instinct told her this was not a private matter. Amara stood at her side, as was custom for a princess of age, present for all formal audiences, visible at all official moments, a living reminder that Veralis had an heir, and its line would continue. Seraphine had not wanted her there this particular morning. She would understand why with a cold and particular clarity very soon. The high vow keeper, a gaunt elf named Corvain, whose family had guarded the old temple for 11 generations, unrolled a scroll so brittle it nearly crumbled in his hands. He held it with the extraordinary care of someone handling something sacred, or something damning. In his case, Seraphine would learn it was both. 3 nights ago, he said, with the measured calm of a man who had been rehearsing this announcement since long before he mounted his horse, the hollow vow stirred for the first time in 400 years. Seraphine's stomach turned to stone. She knew the name. Every ruler of Veralis learned it as a child, the way one learns of a sickness that supposedly no longer poses any threat. A cautionary tale about a time when the kingdom had been young and desperate, and willing to make promises to mountain gods, whose full price they had never stopped to calculate. The hollow vow was the ancient pact her ancestors had struck generations before her line had a crown to inherit, a pact that promised protection, absolute and unwavering, in exchange for a price the old texts never named plainly, only hinted at, in language deliberately designed to be forgotten. "What does it want?" Seraphine asked. Her voice was steady. 20 years of practice at sounding steady when nothing inside her was. Corvain did not look at her when he answered. He looked at Amara. The way he looked at her, that precise, measuring glance, told Seraphine everything she needed to know before a single word left his mouth. "The bloodline's firstborn daughter," he said, "given willingly on the night the next full moon crowns the sky, or the protection ends, and the army gathering at our northern border, the one your scouts have been too frightened to report honestly, will find Veralis as defenseless as a kingdom without walls." The throne room went silent enough to hear the rain still dripping from the vow keeper's robes onto the stone floor. A soft, relentless sound, like a clock counting down something. Amara's hand found Seraphine's sleeve, the first time she had reached for her mother in over a year, and the gesture was so unexpected, so unguarded, that Seraphine had to fight with everything she had, not to flinch from the tenderness of it. And in the touch, she felt all of it at once. Her daughter's fear, her daughter's youth, the awful smallness of being 18 years old and newly told by a stranger in wet robes that the ancient world has decided you belong to it. "Who?" Seraphine said, quietly enough that only the people immediately surrounding her could hear the iron underneath the softness. "Told King Threll of Marrowhold that our protection was about to expire." Corvain's silence was its own answer. Someone had timed this. Someone who knew the old pact. who understood exactly when the hollow vow would wake, who had made certain a rival king's army was already encamped at the border, before Seraphine had been given even a single day to think. This was not prophecy awakening on its own schedule. This was prophecy being used as a weapon, aimed with precision at the one decision a grieving queen would be most predictable about. They were counting on her grief making the choice for them, and Seraphine, looking at her daughter's face, really looking perhaps for the first time in years, at the particular way Amara still looked exactly like Aldrich when she was frightened, the same furrow between the brows, the same instinct to go still when the ground moved, understood, with the force of a blow to the chest, that she had 3 weeks to decide who she truly was, a queen who would do anything to save her kingdom, or a mother who would burn it to the ground before she let them touch her child. What would she become when forced at last to choose between the two things she had spent 20 years pretending could not both be held at the same time? Grief makes strange architects. In the days after Corvain's warning, Seraphine did something she had not done since Amara was very small. She canceled her morning council sessions without apology or explanation, and spent those hours instead in her daughter's chambers, simply sitting with her, not governing, not advising, not filling the space with the kind of purposeful, useful presence that had always been her preferred disguise for love. Simply being present, the way she had forgotten how to be for so long, that it felt, at first, like wearing clothes that no longer quite fit. Amara did not trust it. She had learned the hard way not to mistake her mother's rare softness for permanence, not to build anything on it, not to lean into it, because the moment she leaned, the warmth would be replaced by some pressing matter of state, and she would be left where she always ended up, holding air. So, on the second morning when Seraphine arrived again and sat down in the chair by the window without being asked, Amara said, not looking up from the book she was not reading, "You don't have to pretend. I know what I am to this kingdom. I've always known. The spare that became necessary. You are not a spare." Seraphine's voice cracked. It was a small crack, barely audible, but Amara heard it, because she had spent her entire life listening for exactly that sound and never finding it. "You are the only thing I have left of your father's laugh." It was the first completely true thing Seraphine had said to her daughter in years, offered without strategy or calculation, or any thought at all about how it would land, and it landed like a struck bell. The kind of sound that doesn't simply occur and end, but keeps sounding in the air long after the initial moment, filling the room with its echo. Amara looked up from her book. Seraphine met her eyes and did not look away. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Some things, when they finally arrive, do not need words to be understood. It was during those same fragile days that a young soldier named Kyle first entered the story in the way that mattered, not through heroics, not through design, but through accident, which is usually how the most important things arrive. He had been newly assigned to the princess's personal guard after the old captain fell ill with something the palace healers were calling exhaustion, and everyone else was calling fear. Kyle was not a man given to either. He was not noble born. He had no title, no family name that carried weight at court, no claim on anything the palace offered except a soldier's wage and a soldier's work. But he was observant in the way that people who grow up with very little learn to be, noticing the things others overlook because they cannot afford to miss them. He noticed, for instance, during a routine inspection of the eastern barracks, that a particular ceiling beam had cracked along its middle joint and was being held in place by nothing more reliable than habit. He noticed it roughly 4 seconds before Amara walked directly beneath it. He moved without thinking, the way people move when instinct outpaces thought entirely. Pure reflex translated into action, and pulled her sideways by the elbow as the beam came down in a spray of ancient dust and splintered wood. She was not hurt. He was not hurt. The beam demolished a rack of practice shields and accomplished nothing else of consequence. The whole thing was over in less than 10 seconds. And then Kale, covered in dust, breathing hard, still holding her arm, let go, stepped back and apologized. Not for saving her, for grabbing her without permission first. Amara found, in the hours and days that followed, that she could not stop thinking about that apology. Not the rescue. She had been rescued from minor disasters at court before, in the particular way that useful people are always being rescued by people who want to be useful to them. The rescue itself a kind of transaction. What stayed with her was the apology afterward, the instinct to check whether his help had inconvenienced her. No one at court had ever apologized to her for anything. They flattered her, or they used her, or they pitied her, or they forgot her. Kyle had simply treated her like a person whose comfort mattered more than his own correctness. It was an unremarkable thing, as kindnesses go, and yet she kept returning to it. Seraphine noticed the way her daughter's eyes followed Kyle across the training yard during their morning drills. She was a woman who had spent 20 years reading courts. Who wanted what? Who was watching whom? What lay beneath every carefully composed expression? She recognized what she was seeing in her daughter's face, and she felt it in her chest like a closing fist. Not because Kale meant harm. He was, by every measure she could apply to him, a good man, a rare enough thing in any court that she did not discount it. But hope was a luxury Amara could not afford. Not with the full moon climbing a little higher each night. Not with the countdown already running, and a girl who was just beginning to look at someone the way Amara was beginning to look at Kyle was a girl with a great deal to lose. Seraphine did not stop it. She told herself she was simply watching, gathering information, but if she had been honest with herself, and she was finally beginning to try, she would have admitted that she could not bear to take one more thing from her daughter. Not even hope. Not even hope that might hurt her more in the end than its absence would have. She only wondered with a quiet and terrible ache whether she was watching her daughter build a life, or watching her build one final luminous memory to carry into a dark the rest of them were still pretending might not come. If you're still here with me, subscribe to Elf Stories. There are many more unforgettable tales waiting to be told. Kyle did not know at first what made him seek the princess out so often in the days after the barracks incident. He told himself it was duty, a guard's natural attention to a charge he had nearly failed to protect, heightened by the particular sharpness that comes from having almost been a second too late. But duty does not explain why he began memorizing the particular rhythm of her silence. How it was different from sadness, different from indifference, a silence that had texture and weight, and seemed, to him, like a room that had too many things in it, and nowhere adequate to put them all. It did not explain why he arrived early to the training yard most mornings, long before his shift required it, simply to watch her practice archery alone in the gray, pre-dawn light. She was very good. She was also in those quiet minutes before the yard filled with people who needed things from her, entirely herself, unhurried, uncalculated, the bow drawn back with a focus so complete that she seemed to exist outside the prophecy, outside the palace, outside the countdown. None of them were supposed to speak aloud. Just a girl, good at something, not being watched, not being needed, not being the heir to anything. He found he could breathe more easily just watching that. What Kyle did not know, what almost no one outside the throne room knew yet, was that the girl he was quietly falling for had 3 weeks left to live, according to a pact older than either of their families. Seraphine knew, and every time she saw them together, standing close in the corridor, laughing at something small and ordinary, performing all the unremarkable rituals of two people discovering that the other one is exactly who they wanted to find. Hope and grief tangled so tightly in her chest that she could no longer distinguish between them. The court did not approve, of course. Courts rarely approve of anything that cannot be taxed or traded, or converted into an alliance. Lady Isolde, who had been angling for a betrothal between Amara and her own son, since before either child was old enough to have an opinion about it, made certain her disapproval reached the Queen through every available channel, over dinner, through carefully worded letters, via the mouths of advisors she had been cultivating for years, precisely for moments like this. "The princess," Lady Isolde told the council one morning, her tone carrying the precision of a blade being sharpened rather than merely drawn, "has been seen walking the western garden after dark with a member of the guard, twice this week. The kingdom's future cannot afford. Let her have this," Seraphine said. And the tone she used to say it was the same tone that had ended larger arguments than Lady Isolde had ever attempted to begin. The silence that followed was the particular kind that occurs when 20 years of accumulated authority arrive in a room before they are expected. It startled even Seraphine. How quickly the words had come, and how completely she had meant them. 20 years of choosing the kingdom's comfort over her daughter's heart. 20 years of treating Amara's wants as expenses to be minimized, rather than lives to be lived. And now, with so little time left, she found she could not bring herself to take one more thing from her, not even a walk in a garden. But the court was not the only resistance Kyle and Amara encountered. Kyle himself came close to ending it before it ever truly became something on the 7th night. Came to find her after his shift had ended, jaw tight, eyes refusing to settle on hers, carrying the particular posture of a man, preparing to say something he does not want to say, because he has convinced himself it is the right thing. He had heard things. The barracks were not a place where secrets lived long. Soldiers talked, guards talked, and what they talked about was the vow-keeper's unusual number of visits to the temple archives lately, the way the moon was being watched from the palace towers at all hours, the quiet that had descended over the royal household like a held breath. He had heard Amara's name attached to things he did not fully understand, but could not entirely dismiss. "Tell me it isn't true," he said. She could not. Something shifted in his face. She watched it happen the way grief arrives before it is earned, before the thing you are grieving has even been officially confirmed. The sorrow that comes from loving someone and suddenly understanding the distance between them is not a matter of geography. "Then why would you let yourself get close to me at all?" he asked. And it was not an accusation. It was something rawer than that. Genuine incomprehension. The question of someone who would rather understand pain than be shielded from it. "Why not push me away and spare us both?" "Because I didn't choose this," Amara said, and she was crying, quietly, without ceremony. The kind of crying that has been waiting a long time and does not announce itself. "Everyone keeps deciding things for me. The prophecy decided I would die before I was old enough to understand why. My mother decided years ago that loving me too visibly would make her a weaker queen. I am so tired of being decided for. This is the only thing I have ever chosen for myself. The only thing I chose because I wanted it, not because it was required of me or expected of me or assigned to me at birth." Kale did not have an answer for that. He thought about it. She could see him thinking, could see him turning the thing over in his hands, the way he handled everything, carefully and without rushing, as if breaking something through carelessness would matter more to him than any other outcome. Then he stayed, sat down next to her on the stone bench and stayed. Some nights, staying is the only answer love has left. Meanwhile, Seraphine's investigation had been quietly overtaking her. She had not trusted Corvain from the moment he walked into her throne room. Not the information he carried, which might be genuine, but the timing of its arrival, which was too precise to be innocent. Prophecies do not awaken on politically convenient schedules. Wars do not gather at borders the exact week that an ancient pact decides to make its demands. She had sent her own scholars to the temple archives, chosen for their discretion rather than their rank, with a task she described as theological research, and which was, in fact, something very different. She had asked them to find the original text of the Hollow Vow, not the version the vow-keepers recited. the version someone had written 11 generations ago, before 11 generations of a single family had been the sole interpreters of its meaning. 3 scholars worked through 2 nights, translating handwriting so faded it was more ghost than ink. What they found in the oldest fragment they could recover was not what Corvain had read aloud in the throne room. The words were different, not dramatically, not obviously, but different in ways that changed everything. The way a single altered word in a contract can invert its entire meaning. Seraphine read the fragment 3 times before she trusted her own understanding of it. Then she read it a 4th time, because the hope it contained was too dangerous to accept carelessly. Her hands were not steady. If she was right, the prophecy that was about to take her daughter's life had never demanded a daughter's life at all, but the fragment ended mid-sentence, torn away deliberately, along a line so clean that it could only have been done with intention, not accident, and the rest of the text, whatever the pact actually required, if not blood, was somewhere else, somewhere someone had not wanted her to find, someone with access to the temple, someone the vow keepers trusted, someone who had ensured 400 years ago or 4 generations ago or perhaps within living memory, that the version of the prophecy Veralis heard was the one most useful to its enemies. Seraphine spent the night before confronting Corvain in the archive, pacing its length with the fragment in one hand and a realization in the other that frightened her more than any army had, that the deception was not ancient and impersonal. It was close. It was inside her own walls, and whoever had maintained it for 4 centuries had been watching her court, her decisions, her daughter, and waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. Who removes a truth capable of saving a child's life? Only someone who profits from the child's death, and the person who profited most from a queen too consumed by grief to defend her kingdom was sitting at this very moment, somewhere inside her palace, sleeping easily. The answer arrived 4 days later, and it arrived the worst possible way. Through a confession Seraphine had not wanted to have to extract, from a man she had not wanted to have to suspect. She summoned Corvain alone to the archive, at an hour when the temple was empty of all but the wind in its upper arches. She laid the torn fragment before him on the reading table and watched his face for the smallest shift. She found it almost immediately, a stillness in him that was too complete, the kind that is not natural composure but its controlled imitation. "You knew," she said. "You knew the pact never demanded her death." His silence lasted the length of a breath held too long to pretend it wasn't being held. Then, finally, the high vow keeper of the hollow vow, guardian of the old faith for 11 generations, inheritor of a sacred charge so ancient that its original purpose had long since been buried under layers of practiced recitation, sat down heavily in the scholar's chair beside the table, as though the weight of 400 years had finally remembered where it belonged. "My family did not write the lie," he said. There was no self-pity in it, only the flat, exhausted tone of a man confessing something he has spent a lifetime knowing he would eventually have to say. "We inherited it," he told her then, "all of it, everything his line had carried in careful silence for generations." A vow keeper before him, 8 predecessors back, had struck a private bargain with the royal house of Marrowhold, Veralis's oldest rival. In exchange for gold enough to rebuild the failing temple from ruin, that ancestor had agreed to alter the telling of the prophecy, not to invent it wholesale, but to change its key demand, to make it require blood that the original pact had never asked for, to transform a pact about power into a pact about sacrifice, so that one day when the old protection wavered and Marrowhold's army finally moved, the Queen of Veralis would be too consumed by prophecy and grief to defend herself clearly. A kingdom mourning a sacrificed princess does not fight with the same resolve as a kingdom that has just discovered it has been deceived. A broken kingdom is easier to take than a whole one. Seraphine listened to all of it without interrupting. She was, in those minutes, the coldest version of herself, not the cold of distance, not the old armor, but the cold of someone who has just understood an entire geometry of harm and is already calculating what to do about it. "What does the true pact require?" she asked when he was done. Corvain could not fully answer. The torn fragment held the rest, and he did not know where that rest had gone, only that his predecessor, dying 60 years past, under the weight of a guilt that had finally become too heavy to carry, had spoken once of concealing the whole truth, somewhere even the vow-keepers could not reach, somewhere only royal blood could open. It was Amara who led them there. She remembered, suddenly, sitting in the archive the following morning while Seraphine and 3 scholars argued over translations. A small chamber beneath the old royal crypt. She had explored it as a child, the way all lonely children explore the empty spaces of large buildings when there is nothing else to do with their afternoons. The chamber had been sealed by a lock she had always assumed was ceremonial. A lock that, when she had pressed her palm against it at 11 years old, had done something she had never told anyone about. It had warmed under her hand and made a sound like a note played too low to be properly heard, felt rather than heard, in the bones of her chest. She had told no one. She hadn't known what to make of it. She had simply filed it in the large mental drawer labeled "Things About This Palace I Do Not Understand," and left it there for 7 years. The drawer had just become relevant. By the light of Kyle's borrowed torch, they opened the chamber door. Amara's palm against the lock, her blood where the metal edge cut just enough to confirm what it was looking for. And inside, in a stone box sealed with something that was neither wax nor magic, but some combination of both that had survived 4 centuries perfectly intact, they found the rest of the founding pact. Exactly as the first vow-keeper had written it. Exactly as Corvain's ancestor had been paid to obscure. The hollow vow did not ask for a life. It asked for power freely, returned. An ancient artifact, called the Ember Crown, forged in the same era as the original pact, lent by the mountain to the first queen of Seraphine's line, as a tool for building the kingdom, with the understanding that one day, when the kingdom required renewal of its protection, the crown's stored power would be given back willingly, not taken, not demanded through grief and sacrifice, returned the way borrowed things are meant to be returned, by someone who understood that the borrowing had always been temporary. No blood, no death, no daughter given to a stone altar in the dark, only a queen willing to surrender a piece of her own power, which was, of course, exactly what Marrowhold had spent 400 years hoping no ruler of Veralis would ever discover. A queen who could save her kingdom and her daughter simultaneously, by surrendering something to the mountain, rather than feeding it someone of was not a queen who could be leveraged, not a queen who could be maneuvered by grief. A frightened, broken queen was useful, a whole one was not. Seraphine stood in that buried chamber with the truth finally resting in her hands, and felt, for the first time in 20 years, the walls she had built inside herself begin to shift. Not collapse, not yet, but move, like a structure that has been holding too much weight, finally being allowed to breathe. Then she looked at the stone box more carefully, at the inventory scratched into its side, and understood that the Ember Crown itself was no longer in the royal vault. She had checked the vault 11 days ago, as a matter of routine. It had been there. She had not checked since. 11 days. Someone had known she would eventually find this chamber. They had moved quickly. She did not run back to the palace. She walked, because running would have told the court what she knew before she was ready for them to know it. But her mind had already arrived there long before her feet did, running through the list of people with access to the royal vault, eliminating names, narrowing the possibility to the one name she had been, in some shadowed part of herself, trying to avoid arriving at. Who else had access to both the vault and the temple? Who else would have known well in advance that the true pact was about to be discovered? Who else had been, from the very beginning, in a position to make all of this arrive on exactly the right schedule? Lord Bastian had served as royal treasurer for 11 years. He had stood beside Seraphine at Aldrich's funeral. his hand steady on her shoulder. He had earned the rarest thing a court can offer, genuine trust. She found him in the treasury, before the ember crown's empty pedestal, and he did not deny a single word of it. "I didn't lie about loving this kingdom," he said. "I simply loved another one first. King Threll promised my family's exile undone. All I had to do was ensure the crown disappeared before you discovered what the pact truly required. A grieving mother is predictable, Seraphine. A queen who still has her power is not. Where is it? On its way to the border. By morning, it will be in Threll's hands. You'll have your daughter back." A pause. "You simply won't have a kingdom left standing around her." That was the real impossible choice. Not love versus duty, but something far crueler. She could not recover the crown in time. The protection would lapse at midnight regardless, unless she gave the mountain something else, something royal, something freely surrendered. She understood what that something had to be. Not Amara's life, her own throne. The pact had never wanted blood. It had wanted power freely given. And the only power she held that was genuinely irrevocably hers was not an artifact. It was her authority, her right to rule. 20 years of being the thing that did not break, offered back willingly to the mountain that had first lent its protection to her bloodline. If she was wrong about the translation, she would lose everything. Her crown, her identity, the only version of herself she had built since Aldrich died, and gain nothing. That night, Amara came to the map room and sat across from her without waiting to be asked. "Let me offer it instead," she said. "The pact is my bloodline too." "No." Seraphine said it without heat, without hesitation, the simplest word she had spoken in 3 weeks. "You have not yet had the chance to understand what you would be giving up. I have had 20 years of it." She reached across the table and took her daughter's hand, the way she had not done since Amara was small. "Let me give up the one thing that was never truly mine to keep. If it means I finally get to keep you." At dawn, before the assembled court and the kneeling vow keepers, Seraphine removed the crown with her own hands and spoke the old words of surrender. Her authority, her throne, 20 years of armor she had mistaken for identity, offered back to the mountain. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the old stones beneath the floor began to hum. Light bled up through the cracks, gold and amber. The color the oldest histories described the original hollow vow taking. And every vow keeper in the room fell to their knees, weeping, because they had spent their entire lives guarding a lie, and had just witnessed what the pact had always simply meant. Power freely given, a mother willing to be nothing but herself. The wards renewed, not for a daughter's death, for a mother's willingness to be undone. By midday, word came from the northern pass. Threll's army had found Vairalis's wards blazing back at full strength and had retreated before nightfall. The ember crown was found abandoned on the roadside, a mile from the border, dropped when the light ignited without warning. It was Corvain who knelt before Seraphine in the quiet that followed, not out of obligation, but out of something closer to awe. "The founding pact says one thing more," he said. "Should a ruler offer freely, out of love and not fear, the mountain returns what was given, not as a debt repaid, but as a gift to one who proved themselves worthy of holding it twice." He held out the crown. Its gold was threaded now with amber light that had not been there before. Seraphine looked at it. Then she looked at Amara, standing near the doorway with Kael beside her, alive, unbound, looking back with the expression of a daughter who has just understood, fully and finally, that she was loved. "I will take it back," Seraphine said, "not because I need it to know who I am. I have learned at considerable cost that I do not. I will take it back because Vairalis still needs someone in this chair, and I find I am no longer afraid of sitting in it without losing everything else that matters." She settled the crown back where it belonged. It felt lighter, not because it weighed less, because she did. A year later, the map room was rarely empty. Amara came most evenings now, not out of obligation, but because some habits, once broken open by love, simply become the shape a family takes. They argued sometimes over trade routes and treaties, the way a mother and daughter are allowed to argue when they have finally stopped being afraid of each other. The ember crown sat back on Seraphine's brow during council and ceremony. Those who knew her well noticed she wore it differently, not like armor, like something she had chosen, knowing now exactly what it was and what it wasn't. On the anniversary of that dawn, Seraphine found her daughter in the garden where Aldrich had planted silver leaf trees the year Amara was born. They had grown tall enough now to shade the bench beneath them. "Do you ever regret it?" Amara asked. "No," Seraphine said, without needing to think. "I spent 20 years believing that loving you too much would make me weak. I had it backward the whole time. Nothing I ever held as queen came close to what I became, the moment I chose to set it all down for you." Above them, the silver leaf trees moved in a wind that carried no prophecy, only the ordinary unhurried peace of a mother and a daughter in a garden that had finally stopped holding its breath. Far to the north, the old wards of Veralis hummed beneath the soil, the way they had for 400 years, and would for 400 more. Not because a daughter had been given to them, because a mother had once stood before them with nothing left to offer except herself. And the mountain, it turned out, had only ever wanted to know if anyone still remembered how to love that completely. Some kingdoms are saved by armies, some by walls and treaties, and the careful architecture of power. Veralis was saved by a woman who finally let herself be exactly what she had always, underneath everything, already been. Nothing more, nothing less, only a mother choosing her daughter over everything else she had ever been told a crown required her to be.